I think it's very important. It's part of the pushback of the Syrian government. They've been empowered by the Russian Air Force, and it's changed the balance of power in Syria quite dramatically. And ISIS, of course, is being weakened in Iraq by the Iraqis and by the American Air Force, the coalition Air Force. And we've been getting more and more reports of how weak ISIS has become, and their troops in Palmyra were quite undermined. ISIS killed a Russian officer in Palmyra, and I think that Putin wants to make a demonstration point of this attack on Palmyra. So this is an important gain for the Syrians once they take it. They haven't completely taken the city yet, but it's the center of the desert. It controls important gas wells and all of the roads that move up towards Raqqa and towards Deir ez-Zor and the borders towards Iraq.
It's also, we could say it, an amazing public relations coup for Bashar al-Assad.
Well, it is. And we saw how devastated the city was once ISIS took it over. And Palmyra underlines the narrative that Assad, of course, has been trying to convince the West of, which is that it's us or ISIS. And in Palmyra, that very stark either or does seem to be the case.
To what extent did he help to create this narrative? We had the reports at the beginning of the uprising 5 years ago of jihadists being freed from prisons. The fact that for a long while, as I was saying earlier, he did seem to give ISIS a wide berth, fighting more moderate rebels instead.
Well, I don't give a lot of credence to the fact that he created ISIS. I think ISIS was developing for a long time. It comes out of Sayyid Qutb philosophy of the 1950s, radical Islamism. Of course, the United States gave ISIS a big boost, not only by helping build radical Arab militias in Afghanistan, but of course by destroying the Iraqi state where ISIS really spawned. And of course, America released Baghdadi, the caliph, from jail. I don't think they did it intentionally. And I don't think that Assad intentionally released jihadists. Assad released political prisoners that the UN asked him to release, and that all human rights people demanded that he release. Now, many of those political prisoners were Islamists who then became leaders in the opposition. And this is the dilemma in the Middle East. And we see it in Egypt, we see it in Libya, we see it everywhere. If you empty out the prisons and you give people free elections, they want Islamists to come to the fore. And that's the dilemma. And of course, Assad, by killing Islamists, putting them into jail, has only created a worse situation, a human rights dilemma that has radicalized people. And that's true. Dictatorship radicalizes people. But unfortunately, every regime in the Middle East is a dictatorship. And the West solution, which is to blow apart those regimes, only creates more radicalism and spreads ISIS. So we don't have a solution to radical Islam and jihadist groups.
And where does it leave these political talks that John Kerry's been talking about in Moscow with his Russian counterpart?
Well, I'm afraid those talks don't seem very promising. They've come out with 12 points, but the regime, the Syrian regime, does not take those talks seriously at all. The way they speak about them is they say, well, the opposition that's turned up in Geneva may own Duma, or half of Duma, one town outside in the outskirts of Damascus. What are we going to do? Are we going to trade them for Duma? What are they going to trade us for Duma? And that's the way they talk about it. Is, you know, most of the important people who own real estate in Syria that we could negotiate with are not at these talks. They are people like Al-Qaeda or ISIS and other Ahrar al-Sham that haven't turned up at the peace talks. Now, of course, the Syrian regime, writ large, does not want to talk with the rebels. They want to defeat them on the battleground, and they believe that Russia is willing to do that with them. Now, John Kerry's words that Assad is going to see sense and is going to step down, I think is very far from any reality. And I don't think Russians are going to make him do it.
One final question for you on that. Russia now drawing down its presence inside of Syria. Where will that leave Bashar al-Assad in the long run?
Well, he's drawing it down to maybe half force, but still we see in Palmyra there are about 25 bombing missions a day. So the Russians are bombing more than the Americans, for example. and they don't seem to be really abandoning Assad in any way, shape, or form. They're going to take it down a notch, and they're going to make the Assad army, the Syrian Arab army, do more of the heavy lifting. But I don't think Russia has abandoned the Assad regime in any way.